G'day and welcome to another episode of the Think Different Prep series. Today's episode, we are going to be discussing the hidden costs of competition that no one talks about. Everyone talks about the costs of prep, the diet, cardio, posing, coaching, the sacrifice, the time. But almost nobody talks about the cost that destroys more preps than most hunger ever will. Financial instability, the actual costs, the literal costs of competing. You cannot prep with clarity, certainty, and consistency when your bank account is all over the shop. You cannot execute with certainty when every week feels like a financial negotiation, when you are looking for shortcuts, cutbacks, negotiations with your coach. You cannot chase the elite version of yourself while stressing about fuel fees or flights. And yet, that many athletes try. And they all come pretty close to failing. So today we're breaking down one of the least spoken about but most important psychological pillars of prep, financial readiness. Not because prep is just expensive, it is, but because financial stress hijacks the very mental bandwidth that you need to succeed. It is a strange part of the conversation that people don't have. That is how much it costs to actually prep, what is required to stabilize your income in order to ensure that you can get on the stage in the best possible position that you can. This episode will show you why your financial plan is part of the psychological preparation and how poor planning turns even the best athlete into an emotional mess 10, 15 weeks in. So today we'll cover how financial instability creates cognitive fatigue, why budgeting equals mental security, real examples of wasted potential due to poor planning, the emotional costs of financial anxiety, a pre-prep financial audit to eliminate stress, and a closing point to really dial home. If your finances aren't structured, your focus won't be either. Now, these are obviously micro variables. They're important variables. It's not the be all end all of each one. However, the more you spend focusing on things that you aren't prepared for, the more time you try to deal with these problems as they arise, the less emotional capacity and time you have to do everything else. That is why they become important. All these little things start to stack up. So, how financial instability ruins a prep? Financial pressure is one of the most powerful forms of psychological stress, right? It pulls attention, it drains emotional energy, it magnifies self doubt, and spikes anxiety or guilt. Some of the things that financial instability trigger inside a prep: constant worry about costs, guilt when spending on food or travel, stress about show fees and deadlines, fear of letting your coach down financially, difficulty committing to the long-term plan. Prep requires certainty. Money uncertainty destroys that certainty given. When your finances are unstable, every decision becomes emotional to justify. The more justification you have to make, the more rationalization you have to make, the more cognitive bandwidth and value or currency that you have to spend. Should I skip this meal to save money? Can I afford these supplements? Do I stay in prep or pull out? Can our household handle me competing? I've come this far, but can I afford to go further? You start looking at ways in which we can cut costs to save back money, or eventually perhaps pull out of the show because it gets a bit too expensive. That posing coach that you can't pay for, that piece of cardio equipment that you want to have at the household you can't get. Yes, these things are luxuries, obviously, but those little luxuries add up when we start considering that A, bodybuilding requires a 1% physique, B, 1%ers stack up. The issue is, though, that these aren't discipline failures. They're not a lack of will or effort. It is financial structure collapse. So how is budgeting a mental security? A calm mind performs better. Budgeting is not about being rigid, just like tracking macros. It's about creating psychological security, psychological confidence, and stability. Budgeting matters in a prep. It removes uncertainty. It prevents emotional panic spending. It reduces guilt-driven behaviors, which for some people we know can turn to food. It gives you predictability in a deficit. It creates genuine focus on execution. When you know you have a strong financial foundation, you're not worrying about, can I afford the food my coach suggested? Can I afford the increase in fresh vegetables? Can I afford to get these foods? Can I afford to buy these supplements? Obviously, they're going to vary in degree of essential necessity and commitment, but knowing that you can have them is going to take a load off your shoulders. A budget is not restrictive. A financial budget is not restrictive, just like a caloric budget is not restrictive. A budget is liberating through structure. It removes the noise so your mental energy is spent on training, recovery, and discipline. Every coach has seen it. I've seen athletes build world-class physiques, but fall apart because they can only afford one show. They spend 2 or 3 years putting themselves in a position to prep. They've dieted for 16, 20, 30 weeks, suffered, trained, grew, nailed their look. Then it was only one show. They got the feedback. They got the chance to improve. They got a chance to head to the national show, the pro qualified, natural or enhanced. Now either they've dropped out, canned the season, or risked everything to go to the show. Eventually, you're going to run out of budget. Flights, accommodation, tan, the extra shows you could do to gain momentum, the supplementation you need to buy, enhanced or natural. It becomes potential wasted. Not because they weren't good enough, but because they weren't financially stable to prep. People get desperate, they get frustrated, emotional, and they start to try and compromise. The emotional costs of financial stress. Financial stress isn't just impractical, it's emotional. How it feels during prep. It feels like anxiety, shame, guilt, pressure to be perfect and fix the problem, feeling like every mistake costs dollars. Every gram of food has to be exactly proportioned so that you don't overcook or underconsume. The psychological state destroys performance and amplifies stress. It increases irritability, destabilizes discipline, and we start to look for shortcuts. Prep is already a huge cognitive load. We know that. Financial pressure amplifies it. So, this isn't to say that you shouldn't prep. This isn't to say that it is only for the rich. It isn't to say that you cannot compete and do it. It is to say that you should be aware of the costs and burdens that you're going to sign yourself up for. And it is your responsibility to ensure that you're in the best possible position to execute that prep. That means financial responsibility. So before you start prep, you should know exactly what the next 16 to 30 weeks will cost. Here's some of the non-negotiable financial checklists. Coaching fees, posing fees if you have a posing coach and your coach doesn't offer it. Food, including your weekly grocery bill. The average slightly increases as prep goes on as we start to purchase more whole foods, more produce, more fresh produce, more lean meats. Supplements, not everything, just the essentials that you'll know you'll use. Even the advantageous 1%ers that might have a difference. Show costs, registration fees, federation membership, tan, hair and makeup if you're a female competitor, your trunks, posing lessons, travel to and from venues, travel and accommodation. These things all add up when it comes to the duration of your prep. So you need margin to also consider a buffer fund. Last minute changes, extra meals on travel day. If there is an issue in meals that you have to carry with you and might need to purchase some more, unexpected expenses add up. Savings window. Have at least 8 to 12 weeks of prep expenses saved before you start, or ensure that the income that you are generating versus the outgoings of your bills and living expenses or costs is in a good position. One of the strongest athletes that I ever coached was borderline in a perfect position to place well at the national shows. Physique potential was crazy, mentally committed, training was off tap, Everything was as good as it needed to be. The guy was committed, trained hard, locked in. Financially, though, we started to sink. Can I take this instead of this? Can I buy this instead of this? Can I pay you back next week? Prep bills started to add up. Posing bills started to add up. Things we had to cut back on to ensure that we were able to stay focused. Number of shows available. The locations we could travel to for competing. Everything became a I will see or what about. This isn't a attack on that person. The season was a solid finish. The question that will always linger is, could there have been more? Could it have been better? Could we have been in a better emotional state before we started? That is the type of impact that financial instability will have. And for some reason, a lot of coaches struggle to want to talk about the fact that it is going to cost money. It is the awkward elephant in the room that no one wants to address. But every show comes with costs. And dealing with those costs last minute is about the worst way that you can go about setting it up. So, practical takeaways before you start prep: ask the following questions. Do I know the full cost of the entire season? Have I created a buffer for any unexpected stresses, or have some fallback plans just in case? Do I have a savings plan that looks after my execution, or do I have an income plan that ensures that I'm making enough money to sustain what is required? Can I commit to multiple shows or just one? Am I happy with doing just one? Does my financial reality support my physical ambition? You don't need to be wealthy. You don't need to be a millionaire. You don't need to be a one percenter. You need to be prepared. If you're willing to sacrifice a lot of things to make this happen, it's okay. That's fine. We can work with that. Just be aware and prepared for what's coming. Prep is not just a physical investment, it's a financial one. It's not just a psychological investment, it is a financial one. If your finances aren't structured, focus can't fully be dedicated to the things that we are trying to achieve. This is how we lock in and make sure that we are psychologically and financially ready to compete.